Hi, it's Jeff with Family Legacy Estate Sale again, with another in our city series of videos on collectibles. This particular video is going to be on some vintage comic books. I'm not an avid comic book collector, so I'm not going to speak much on this video. I've got some questions for our guest. His name is Greg, and he's going to show you some of his favorite comics and the reasons he collects what he collects, and give me a big overview on the comic book collecting market. So this is Greg. Nice sunny day here in the Chicago area, and he's going to talk to us about comics and some of his favorites and etc. So without further ado, tell me a little bit about your collection and why you collect what you collect.
My collection is basically in three areas. There's the comic books that I collected as a kid from like 72 to 77, and they were mostly Marvel titles. Here's an example of a Captain America comic, 20 cents back in the day. Here's an example of an Iron Man comic. This happens to be the first appearance of Thanos, who's very popular in the Marvel movies, and Drax the Destroyer, who looks and sounds very different than the one in the movies. But my first foray into comic book collecting were these kind of books that I bought myself, either in a pharmacy or a White Hen. And the second group of comic books I bought as an adult, starting in '88. Not really sure where the end date was, but these were mostly DC comics. This is a Batman storyline where they killed Jason Todd, the second Robin. It was a big deal at the time. Here's a Batman comic where his spine is broken by the supervillain Bane. This was later reenacted in the Dark Knight Rises film. My third collection of comics, or grouping of comics, were comic books that predate or post-date the two previous categories. Here's a Spider-Man comic from the early 1970s. I didn't buy this myself. I got it at a comic book shop or a comic book convention, maybe even eBay. This is the first appearance of the new Black Widow. She existed prior to this, but she wore kind of a silly costume. This is the first time she metamorphosized into the character people know today.
The Scarlett Johansson outfit,
right,
so to speak. Okay.
Yeah, they have her in outline on the cover, so you can't see what she's wearing, but the costume is similar to the one that she wears today.
Okay, makes sense.
This is another old Spider-Man featuring, this was an important storyline at the time, the death of Captain Stacy. This story was like a precursor for the death of Gwen Stacy, which was his high school girlfriend for years before they decided to kill her off in Amazing Spider-Man number 121, which I own but don't have with me.
Oh, okay. And
here's a comic that I bought that post-dates all the other comics. This is a post-apocalyptic revenge story featuring the Wolverine and Hawkeye. This story takes place 50 years after the deaths, actually the mass murder, of all of Earth's superheroes. And these two guys are the only two left, living in a world which has been divided up by the supervillains. So it's a very dark story.
Oh, interesting. So I see you have Marvel and DC. Those are, I assume, not being a real comic guy, that those are the two companies that are the biggest and most popular.
Yeah, but there are other companies now. I'm just not as familiar with them. I mean, I have some Dark Horse comics.
Okay.
Star Wars, but now Marvel has taken that back. There was a company called, well, it was a Todd McFarlane I forget the name of the company, but Todd McFarlane drew Spawn for this company.
Oh, okay.
Image Comics. But most of my comics are, as a young person, Marvel, and as an adult, DC. I didn't like DC Comics in the early middle 70s because they were written down to children. I mean, I probably started collecting when I was 9, and I remember looking at DC Comics at that age going, wow, this is written for a second grader. So even though I was more familiar with the DC heroes, I gravitated more towards Marvel because the stories were a little more adult.
Just from a novice's point of view, just a question. All these superhero movies they make, do they follow the comic book storylines pretty closely? Or do the directors, take liberties?
In some cases they do, and they did a good job of modernizing them. Other cases they just completely made things up. I mean, I mentioned Drax the Destroyer. In this comic book, he is a clothed, very intelligent alien superhero. The guy in the movies, David Bautista, runs around without a shirt 99% of the time, and he's funny because he's so stupid. So that's a situation where they completely change the character. But like with Iron Man, for example, the Robert Downey Jr. Iron Man character, they did a really good job of modernizing the story, the real story. I shouldn't say the real story, but the original story.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. So I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to the overall comic book market. Do you think it's strong, weak?
I see the kind of comics that I go after, in many cases, are replacements for the comic books that I collected in the 70s, which have seen better days.
Yeah.
It's not cheap to get a comic book from the middle 70s, even one that doesn't have a momentous storyline. It's not inexpensive to go back. I'm sorry, it's not cheap to go back and replace those comics.
Yeah.
As far as the state of the industry, I really couldn't say.
Okay. All right, great. Well, I appreciate your time today and a little bit of show and tell. If you like this video and some of my other videos, please like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and we'll be talking to you soon.